can begin because it's already 3:07. So maybe we can begin and others can join, whoever wants to. So welcome, Padmini. Padmini, I'm sorry, I really am going to mispronounce your last name, so I'm not going to even say it. But I think Bhashwati will say it when she gives the your bio more detail. But welcome, and I'm really happy that you're going to be talking about a topic that is, I mean, recently in terms of the media, highlight that was put on the achievements of the disabled athletes at the Paralympics. It got at least people who were not at all conscious of the existence of an idea of Paralympics were enlightened on that. And I think this is the way to begin. And even I have, frankly, though I've been in so many years in the disability work, I've not really heard a presentation on disability sports. So I'm also looking forward to it. So welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you. Bhashwati, will you carry on now? Bhashwati.
Yeah. Good afternoon, friends and colleagues. In the monthly seminar of CWDS, we have with us Dr. Padmini Chennapragada. She did her post-graduation and doctoral research from Texas Women's University. She did her post-graduation in kinesiology, followed by her doctoral degree in adapted physical activity and education. The objective of her doctoral research was to identify barriers that are affecting sport or physical activity opportunities for persons with disabilities in India. The exposure to service that are provided to persons with disability in the United States is a major inspiration behind her interest to take advanced physical education into schools and communities of developing countries. She is currently a US Paralympic classifier trainee for track and field classes of 2017. Her foundation, the Adapted Sports India, ASIF, involved in education and awareness program to improve public knowledge about equitable access to sporting opportunities for persons with disabilities.
Bhashwati, we can't hear you.
She's currently engaged in raising awareness through hashtags on social media. Yeah. Is that okay? I'm actually in a different room.
Yeah, it's a little better, but in between it, your voice trails.
Okay, so she is currently a US Paralympic classifier trainee for track and field class of 2017. Her foundation, the Adapted Sports India Foundation, involved in education and awareness programs to improve public knowledge about equitable access to sporting opportunities for persons with disabilities in India. She is currently engaged in raising awareness through hashtag Adapted Sports India movement on social media. Over to Dr. Chennapragada.
Thank you, Ms. Bhaswati. What I will do right now is, I have the points that I want to discuss today put on a keynote presentation. Let me just do this. Is the screen visible now?
Not yet.
Wait. Oh, I have to share the screen. Sorry.
Yeah, it's come now.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you, CWDS, for this opportunity, especially Renu ma'am for contacting me and communicating with me about this opportunity. One of the first things I would like to make clear before I start speaking on this topic is, see, sports for persons with disabilities is a huge complex concept that is yet not being discussed fully at the academic level in the intersectional spaces of whether it is critical disability studies or sports and research related to physical education. So today, the way the title has been chosen, the way I chose the title is also to roughly give the listeners or the audience an overview of what are the frameworks that are in place. Because if anybody is able to look up my academic background, I base most of my observations and learnings from a systems theory perspective. You know, like I'm constantly not studying the individual who is facing the barriers or the challenges, but including the systems that surround the individual. So the story so far and the way forward is one way for me to tell the audience that I'm not going to give you the facts that you will get on Google and Wikipedia with regards to the statistics. I'm only going to tell you what is happening so far with regards to the grassroots reality. What we see as the medal wins on the top, or the inspirational or the motivational news that the media is reporting, is way far away from the reality of what is happening at the grassroots. And when I say the way forward, especially within this context, I would like for all the researchers and academicians attending this to understand that there is a huge scope for intersectional research to be conducted within this field. So I can only hope that from this presentation, it will lead to more conversations for us to continue our discussions, you know, to collaborate within this area. Let me just, for some reason, this control is in my way. Is the screen visible?
Yes.
I'm having a slight problem. I'm sorry for the confusion, but this control is right on top of my screen and I'm not able to see the screen fully. Let me just move. Yeah.
Or better use arrow key, the forward arrow key.
Yeah. I'm just moving this because it's also showing me a preview on my screen, because of which the stuff is blocked up. Okay. Yeah. So I would like to, before I begin, I would like to tell what the Adapted Sports India Foundation is about. You know, the mission and vision are precisely to promote sports and physical education within an inclusive context within India. And through Adapted Sports India, what is the aim is to be able to bring out the stories that are not reported as an inspirational angle. So see, what is happening within our country is, when they post mega event journalistic reporting is how I would frame it. You know, after a mega event is completed, the journalists are chasing these stories and reporting those stories, but nobody is talking about everybody after the third position medalist who doesn't make it to the top. Nobody's talking about those disabled bodies that are still participating in the process and making the effort. So one of the reasons precisely why the foundation was started was to be able to collate all those stories and voices together and to organize it from a research perspective, and then to also disseminate it into the community from an education angle. Because no matter what we do, if we are not able to bring the research that we are doing into the community, it's sort of a disconnect, you know, and it doesn't serve the community for which we are working. So that's what we do. We basically research and report, and it's a new foundation that I've started about a year ago. Prior to this, it was a social media based advocacy, which I was doing using the hashtag. And eventually I realized that I need a separation of, you know, there should not be a conflict of interest when I'm promoting my work as a professional and also doing the research. So that was the reason for the foundation and the need for a separate advisory board and such. So that's the nutshell about the foundation, and that is where the focus lies for the work. So what are the concepts for discussion today? I know I'm speaking to an audience where the focus is more on it's a Center for Women Development Studies. So what I would like to break this down into is that beyond the gender aspect, the reality of what people with disabilities experience on a daily basis in India is quite complex. It is so complex. It's not just multi-layered. It's multi-layered and it is multidimensionally complex. And to be able to demystify that is, I think, a 2 or a 3 decade process. And to begin with, my current efforts remain to talk. Every time I talk into the community, I am giving out those ideas where researchers can get into these intersectional spaces and work. So one of the first concepts I will discuss is the components that are involved inside disability sport, Indian disability sport. So what are the moving parts? Who are the agencies? Who are the people? What kind of individuals are engaging on a daily basis with the people with disabilities and sports? Then second part is what is visible and what is not visible to us so far about this movement in India. And what are the focus areas that need support for women, especially if we talk about wanting to promote the representation of women and other genders, to also not include the other genders, example, trans men or trans women, because at the global level, there is a lot of discussion about the inclusion and exclusion of transgendered persons in sports that are just, having two gendered competitions. There's only two genders that the competitions are being conducted at the mega event level. So there's a natural exclusion happening of transgendered people who may be pursuing sporting activity and would like to be a part of the competition. So that is something I would briefly discuss. Then the fourth point is, what is safe sports and what are the safe sport practices required to promote sports for people with disabilities, but at the same time also have an emphasis to protect women. Then the fifth point is to consider how do we improve women's representation in sport. So with that, I will go into the first topic of what is this framework I talk about. See, every time I'm trying to talk into an academic system, I want to position the conversation, where is the philosophy coming from? Why am I taking the kind of approach I'm taking? And for that, I would like for you all to refer to the Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, because see, this is something that has not been applied into disability sport that intensely as other theories have been applied to so far academically. But the reason specifically for choosing this theory is, here this theory talks about a 3 or a 4 level or a 4 factor concept, where for an individual to be able to engage in a certain kind of activity, it requires a certain working of multiple moving parts, and the first part is that the person must engage in the activities, and then the activities must take place on a fairly regular basis over an extended period of time. So that it's not like participating in sports one time, once a month in the school, when the person with disability, the student with disability is engaging in sports. So when you say, if you go to a school and you're doing a survey in a school, in a bunch of schools in the city of Hyderabad, if you go and ask a student with disability, do you participate in sport? Their answer is yes. But how many times a week are they participating? What is the intensity of the activity they're engaging in? These are the things that need to be understood. And that is why we need, to understand these this theoretical frameworks that are being used commonly, in the adapted physical activity world. Then, are these activities increasingly more complex? Are they improving a person's ability to perform that activity? So that is a component to be considered. And then, what are the activities that must involve long-term reciprocal relationships? The reason to apply the ecological systems theory into this context in India is that a person with disability does not exist in isolation. No matter the exclusion they face in the families, in the communities, they are a product of a large complex ecosystem in which there are too many moving parts. And when we are talking about bringing people into sports, we are constantly talking about stuff like motivation or self-starting behaviors. We are saying you must show up at these camps. We are doing these camps. We are providing you these amenities. You must show up. People are not factoring in how many complex systems they have to navigate to be able to show up. And then when you slap concepts like caste and gender onto their context, it gets more complicated. That is why after you walk out of this presentation, if you're able to go back to read this theory and begin to apply some of the questions I've been asking into this context, a lot of things will begin to make sense. And the first thing is, what are the components of the Indian disability support system? There are central government level structures, there are state government level structures. At the central government level, the single nodal agency or the body that is responsible for sports for persons with disabilities, there are 4 organizations. There are only 4 organizations. They are called the National Sport Federations. They are recognized by the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports. And these NSFs are single-handedly responsible for everything from grassroots to the top. what a lot of people with disabilities do not understand. So when they sit at home and they suddenly look at an inspirational social media content or a press report of a person who has won a Paralympic medal or a Deaflympic medal or has been awarded the Padma Shri, there is an immediate drive to want to engage in sport. But what a lot of people don't understand is that there is a grassroots to the podium pathway that is completely not published, that's not told to the public, that's not readily made available. But if you are a person with disability and want to win a medal at the international level, because that is a valid desire to have for any citizen, right? I want to see the flag, I want to see my national anthem play at the podium. If you want to become an international medalist in disability sport, you can only play one of those sports, you can only participate in one of those sports that one of the 4 NSFs are promoting. One is the All India Sport Council of the Deaf for deaf sports. Then the Paralympic Committee of India, which promotes only Paralympic sports that are supported and promoted by the International Paralympic Committee. 3 is the Special Olympics Bharat, which is a part of the Special Olympics International Network, which is exclusively for people with cognitive, developmental, or intellectual disabilities. And there is the structure of Special Olympics is quite unique. It does not fall into the high competitive pathways that exist in other non-disabled sport or Paralympic sport. And the 4th and the new NSF that has been awarded is to an organization called Cerebral Palsy Sports Federation of India. This is an organization that is committed specifically to promote a concept called CP sports. So there are certain sports that have evolved over the last 4 decades across the world, where there is specifically designed, the rules are adapted and the structures, and there is adaptive equipment out there for individuals with cerebral palsy to engage in sports. So outside these 4 NSFs, when it trickles down, the structure trickles down at the community, at the state levels, there are state units of these NSFs. So the sport governance structures of it and how they function, what are the rules and policies, this has been discussed in a paper that we have published. So that can be, definitely looked at later on. So moving on to the legislation and policy, the section 30 of the RPWD Act specifically talks about sports. So the section 30 is clearly saying, Baswati, somebody is in the waiting room. I'm not able to accept it, but I'm getting the request on the screen. I hope somebody can accept them in. So the section 30 of the RPWD Act is saying you must provide all kinds of accommodations, modifications, and there is a elaborate list of amendments that need to be made to the existing ecosystem to encourage people with disabilities to go into sports. But these are a bullet list of guidelines, but they are not something like detailed enough to say that a state government or a non-profit at the state level can take those guidelines and use it, right? So the way that section is designed is basically taken from the Article 30 of the UNCRPD, the United Nations Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So between the RPWD Act being notified at the state level and the state passing its own state law in accordance with the national law, that is again a topic that is being debated, and it is not happening at all state levels. There's a lot of issues at the state levels. But if a person is participating in sport, and if they are unable to access the sport, if they have a barrier that they need to beat through legally, the RPWD Act is their go-to document. That is the document that they must confine their fight to, And then there are individual cases that come into the picture of cases like sexual harassment or coaching malpractices or misbehavior of coaches reporting sexual harassment, or even abuse in sport, or how exploitation happens. So the other different acts in India that protect human rights can be brought into the context additionally. But the RPWD Act compared to the PWD 1995 Act is a much comprehensive framework. So that is another big moving part in cases of people with disabilities engaging in sport that researchers must consider. Then the most important part of who pays the money for these sports, right? And so far, say from about 15 years now, the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports in its different capacities, and then the Sports Authority of India through different programs has been beginning to increase the percentage of funding for disabled people to play in sports. But what is complicating the context in India is the participation of a lot of private non-profits to promote sports, or companies that are venturing into investing in these spaces. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then who are the community of technically trained professionals who are teaching in these areas? The grassroots reality is 99% of the coaches who work with people with disabilities in India are not trained or oriented to work with people with disabilities. They do not have the disability rights based training, or they don't have the training of etiquette that is required to work with people with disabilities. So unless somebody like us from an academic context or from a literate context is engaging in that system, you will see constantly a lot of human rights violations happening in that ecosystem. For somebody who's observing this movement at the grassroots, you will see, if you observe it on scene, you will notice how the coaches are not very highly qualified to work, but they are still, having the funding to continue in the scene. So it's all quite a complex context. But these are the four large moving parts of the Indian disability sports ecosystem. So these are the four themes that you need to sort of write down, if you want to venture into researching into this area. Then what is the I call it this four component complex, because who are the big players right now? Everybody wants to own the disabled body in India. That is the reality. Everybody wants to use the disabled body for inspiration. So the first part, the biggest, the governance wise control rests with the national sport federations and the state units, because the state unit has to send the name of the individual to the national body, and the national body is the gatekeeper to send the name of the disabled person to the international competitions. So they are one major big player. Then the second is the quasi-governmental body called the Sports Authority of India, who is the major funding agency, right? If you want to go internationally and compete in a mega event, SAI is your funding body. So SAI must be funding you, because sometimes the costs run into lakhs and it's not affordable. So within this space, what they have done is something called as, I think, a public-private partnership. They are promoting, the government is promoting something called the PPP agreements with organizations like the Olympic Gold Quest or even other organizations like Go Sports Foundation or the JSW, the Jindal Group, which promotes sports. So all these organizations are also now big major players, because they sponsor huge amounts of money for some of the upcoming athletes. So they get involved in the decision making. But are any of these people trained in critical disability study context, or are they trained to work with people with disabilities? That information is still not available. And largely that's not also happening. That is the truth, because they don't have any subject matter experts from these fields, even being a part of their boards or planning processes. And then the fourth most essential part of this complex is how the corporate social responsibility funding is coming in. So within this complex where all these 4 or 5 moving parts are there, nobody is talking about gender. That is the reality. So when I was asked to speak for this, what I wanted to not sound like was somebody who would say everything is bad, everything is dark. Yes, the good work is happening. There has never been this much promotion of sports for persons with disabilities. Definitely better since 2014, but they're not engaging the disability rights community and the experts who have been pushing for human rights for people with disabilities. They are not engaging with these organizations or with this system. So that is a big point of disappointment for us who say that there could be benefit, right? And what is visible to us and what is invisible to us? See, everybody is motivated by the medals. Everybody is motivated by a disabled person, a visibly disabled person sitting and talking or delivering TED Talks or speaking about their experience. Everybody is forwarding it on WhatsApp and is sharing it on LinkedIn. But what Indian citizens who are getting inspired by the visibility of this development don't know that for every 1% you see at the top, I mean, this is only anecdotal, right? I'm only coming up with a rough number. I'm not saying this is statistically right, but the number could be much more higher. For every one person who ends up at the podium, like say Avani Lekra or a Deepa Malik, or back in the day, Malati Holla, who got the media attention, there are thousands of women who are not even scratching the surface of that empowerment. These are women who are not even experiencing good support when they're training at the grassroots. And that is not documented. So what is the need of the hour within the academia, the intersectional space of disability rights and sports and gender, is conducting studies and projects that will document these grassroots realities. Let us keep aside what is happening at the top, what is being hyperly reported by the journalists and media for their improved TRPs and site clicks. What needs to be studied is what are the broken grassroots systems. And within the women's context of what is not visible is national sport federations that do not have women's leadership. So you're often dealing with men who do not have a context of what women's sports requires. And now when you add disability to that angle, it is complicating the context immensely. So I can give you some examples of it further, but if you ask me what are the focus areas that need support for women, right? Representation of women in the NSF boards. The 4 NSFs that I have mentioned, if you go back to their websites and look at the board of the 4 NSFs, you will be baffled to see that there is not even 25% representation of women on those boards. And in exception to the CPSFI, which is a very recent, very new organization, the 3 other organizations, they have been getting funding from Government of India, say from almost 2008, right? Even before that, they have been getting funding from the central government. And you will be amazed to see that there's less than, I think 25% is also more, less than 5% of representation on their national boards or their advisory boards. And say if you find the photograph and the name of a woman, oftentimes when you try to contact the organization, you will see that you cannot finally get to speak to that woman who is on that board. These are like placeholder positions. So while it might come across as I'm being critical of the women who are trying to make the effort, oftentimes women engaging in these organizations are also allowing for them to be placeholders. So partly they're adding to the problem. These are not actively engaging individuals, but they are parking their position, they're giving their photographs and names. But when you have to talk to somebody to talk about what is happening exactly with the federation, you will again end up talking to a man who is probably the one-man show for the entire body. So, you know, there is a research that is required to go to study how these organizations are functioning, what are their women-centric or what are their policies that are promoting the representation of women and presence in the programs. Then what percentage of the technical staff are women? I mean, you would be baffled that there is a percentage of women participating in the sport would be exponentially high in cases like Paralympic Committee of India. When you have to go at the international level, you'll see there is these women showing up. But in reality, at the state and the national level, there you cannot even count on a single hand how many women coaches and technical officials are there. Oftentimes they are the ones who are probably even training these people, these athletes. But when it has to go to the international representation or for the visibility of it, the women is always told to, you know, stay back or not have the mic or not have the voice to say exactly what she's doing. So that is how the control is working in these NSFs. That is the reality of how they function. And if you look at, if you as researchers, it's very easy. It's if you just go on the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports' website, they have their annual reports. Say from 2008 onwards, every year's annual report is available on the website. And you can pull up the National Sports Development Code and other guidelines that have been notified by different NSFs and state governments. If somebody would do a, I don't know, critical content analysis or something of those documents, you will very clearly see that neither their policy nor their philosophy is aligned towards including or improving the representation of women. There often terms usage of, you know, terms like he only or him, or forgetting that there is also no inclusion of grievance redressal mechanisms, or what are the pathways? Say example, under the RTI Act 2005, every organization which receives a certain X amount of funding from the government is required to list their chief public information officer on their public portals or their office documents. Whereas within the context of these sport federations, you will rarely see the mention of an individual who is responsible for grievance reporting, or who is the person, your point of contact. If there is a woman in the organization who needs to report a complaint, there is no those mechanisms are not available. So one side, these are all the areas that require lot of attention from the researchers to research and write about to begin with. Then the second point is there is also lack of awareness among the community that these are their rights. So that is the gap that the research can bridge. So any researcher publishing the study is not sufficient. So example, when we published our first study about Indian Paralympics in anywhere in the world, right? There has never been a study on Indian Paralympics at all. And when we published, we didn't go to the traditional adapted sports journals. We went to a law journal because we wanted more of the legal fraternity and the community to know, instead of it being confined to a elite few who are working in APA. And after we published that study, me and my co-author, Mr. Sunil Jain, we both had to specifically download the study, contact people, email them, and initiate conversations and discussions about their findings and their understanding from the paper. So what I'm saying for researchers here is also that while research on these lines can be started, can be commenced and published, you cannot leave it at the publication part. There is a huge responsibility when it comes to disability sport in India. If as academicians you're going to publish the study, it is your responsibility cannot end there. As a Center for Women Development Studies, there is a need for you to even probably develop opportunities where you can disseminate this information at a more basic level. Maybe do like town halls or something, because there are so many women with disabilities in India today. Example, there was the occasion of an event in Bangalore where an event happened where there were so many rights violations happening, and women knew that they would not be given the amenities if they went there. They didn't have the amenities, yet they go year after year. And you begin to wonder why they do that, right? Everybody is looking at the top of people like Deepa Malik or Avni Lekhra, who has minted millions. And now they're saying, well, if I push through too, they don't understand the complex setup in the place which says only the people closer to the power centers are getting access to that. There is no system still in place. A person sitting in Adilabad of South India, Adilabad district of South India, will not be able to make it to the international podium without knowing the right people at the right turn. So the system is still not clear. So unless it is researched and written up about more, this system cannot be fixed or addressed. That is the reality of what the focus areas are and where the researchers need to focus on. Then what are the safe, when I keep referring to safe sports, what is the safe sports we are talking about? What are these practices I am talking about? Oftentimes the moment we use the term abuse in India, people are thinking it is sexual abuse. I say it is not only sexual abuse. Abuse can be in so many other different forms. It can be emotional abuse, it can be coercion, it can be intimidation, which if you venture out a little into the sporting community in India, you will often meet athletes who will say abusive behaviors from the coaches, inappropriate behaviors from the coaches are a given. Them walking into the sporting arenas, get that from their seniors to say is that this guy is going to behave like this lady is going to behave like this, accept it, and imagine the impact of an individual who will survive a system like that, will eventually become the coach, coaching more next generations, right? So what is safe sports? Safe sports is a concept that has been more floated in the global north, which is coming mainly from United States. There is a certain list of practices which compose a safe sport context. I will not go into it because this can be available. It's available on Google. But it primarily talks about being able to provide opportunities or spaces where young children, women, men, and anybody who is engaging in it as a stakeholder will not be harmed in any capacity, physical, mental, sexual, or emotional. So from these 4 components to identify abuse, we all know how many layers it has, right? And how can what are the protections that need to be put in place? Example, beyond the reporting, are we designing the sporting spaces in such a way that there is that openness, that a coach or a technical professional who is working in that space feels that they are watched? Is there enough vigilance in the matter, so that the person working in that space is saying, oh, I may have this personal behavior, but I cannot push it on to the student because I am being watched. There is a regulation. Right now, even though the government has been improving its funding and has been increasing the amount of investment, there is no awareness for the government officials themselves governing the space that there is a need for better procedural safeguards to be put in place. There is no policy which talks about, I mean, there are policies that are being taken from here and there from the acts, but there is not a comprehensive manner in which they are saying this is the standards that the staff must meet. That if a male professional will have to work with women, these are the standards that they must meet. Those kinds of rigid guidelines have not been written, published, and enforced. So that is why the recent episode of the football coach who has been abusing young athletes from a very long time, young football players, then the other case in Tamil Nadu. The reason why I'm not going into the particulars of each of these cases is this information is available in the public domain. But why are we as a country picking up after the complaint occurs? That is something that we need to investigate as an academic community, because we are not identifying and amplifying the spaces that need attention from the policymakers or from the law enforcers. And then coaching malpractices. And within the context of women, coaching malpractices are, there is such a fine line, and in India that line is blurred so well that I have had women athletes who told me, I myself have experienced it. A very senior gentleman from Special Olympics Bharat. I remember we spoke well, and we were having a communication about this Special Olympics, everything. And then they, out of the blue, they come up with this thing to say, it's like, oh, we would make such a good pair, you know. And this is a 50-year-old man I'm talking about. And they will say something like that, and they will immediately catch that you are an aware person who is going to call them out on it. And they will say, oh, it was a joke. So I have spoken to so many young female players and athletes in this country who say that it happens like a slap at the back of their hand. They think it's very normal. They don't think it's a bad thing, right? But you imagine that continues to happen to you over a period of time, and there are so many moments of vulnerability when you're pushing yourself to high levels of competition, and that leads to so many challenges for a woman to survive that. So there is a critical need for important research to happen within this space as to how are the coaches even functioning in this space. What are the rules that are permitting the participation of coaches across genders, you know, across the genders. I know some coaches who work in places like the Sports Authority of India who actually bully the younger athletes to be able to almost do things that they are not lawfully permitted to do. Right? And the carrot that is dangled in front of them is the fact that you will get to the podium. If you're good with me, I am good and I am chummy with the NSF people. If you are nice to me, I will ensure that your name is on the list. So there are governance issues also that are not monitored in this country that needs attention of research and reporting. Then when you talk about grievance reporting pathways, the football players who reported against the coach, they have been reporting for a very long time, but there is definitely an apathy from the government on these matters for safe sports in this country. So what needs to be understood is that while there is a motivation to promote the sport, there is not a motivation, or even the government is not having the information. They don't have the empirical information. So the critical need of the hour is, while we talk of disability sport, we academically, there is a need to create a working group or some form of a collaboration where this type of conversations can continue to happen, that more research can be published, more investigations can be done on these topics, so that it can become a source of information for the government. So with that, I'm going to just wrap up what I spoke, and I would like to take questions because otherwise I think I can just go on forever. It's not going to help any of us. And this is the last thing I wanted to tell. Just think about it, right? when teams are being prepared, especially I would like for all of you to look up because I was the person involved in that case from start. Samiha Barveen versus Joint Secretary. It's a Madras High Court judgment. Amazing judge, great lawyer, and more than anything, it was the power of the female athlete, the deaf athlete, Samiha Barveen, and her mother, Mrs. Salamat. Salamat's, see, this is what that needs to be talked about more in this country. It's not just inspiration. When Samiha was discriminated for being the only woman, and they said to send an only woman, again there will be issues, we'll have to send a female coach or some escort, so we'll just drop the girl. I mean, this is a girl who has athletically proven that she has passed the minimum qualifying score, right? And when we fought and we literally said we're able to get her to go to Poland, see the impact it makes, right? When for the judgment to have gotten out, the judgment clearly listed some of the challenges that women face, the triple layer of threat that women with disabilities face to promote their participation in sport. So what needs to be understood is that to prevent the problems that women are facing for participating in sport, there is an essential need to pay attention to these topics called like scouting and recruitment. Are these NSFs even having those strategies in place? What are their retention and protection mechanisms? They don't have that in place. So all these also can be researched and written about. And is there curricular content within our sport technical courses which is talking about gender and inclusion? No, because 99% of this coaching material is again quite old. It is not updated, and it is again very gender skewed, definitely talks about from a male perspective, doesn't include the other genders. So there is a need to critically conduct a lot of research studies and publish empirical data out of this topics, and only then can we really talk about enforcing a comprehensive policy. Without the research material getting out there, I think the government also is unable to trust the anecdotal data. A foundation like mine goes, and then an organization like yours goes, and they're saying, where is the objective data that we can base our decision making on? So I will leave you with that, and I will open up for questions.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Yeah, not a question. I mean, just a comment. Like, you focused on the structures, like largely the macro structures, and that's very informative for people who are, new to the area. But if, I'd like you to kind of complement that with, to reach from the home where you're disabled to the national federation or to the state level or to the, I don't know, someone in the village who knows there is such a thing as this federation, and to identify that capacity in a disabled person for sport. I mean, what are the structures that are there that will produce a Deepa Malik at that level? But I mean, that there must be a range of structures at the level accessible to the disabled person for him or her to even think of a possibility of moving in that direction. So from your engagement with sports people, sports persons, sports women with disabilities in these different places, like what are the pathways they have to traverse to be able to actually get on the pathway to a sporting life, a sporting experience? I'm not even saying a sporting career, because one of the things that one hears from the podium side, that many of the people who get, they are working in some government job. I mean, even non-disabled, they're working in some government job, like Dhoni was in the railways or something like that. So how are these disabled people getting into the system? Because I'm thinking of the disabled people at the low, grassroots level, women at home, inundated by those stereotypes where education is a problem. So where are they coming?
What we must recognize that in India today, still people who are reaching sport programmings and those competitions, they're largely people who have access to a certain element of a certain factors of privilege in their life. To this date, as we speak now, we still do not have pathways that you're talking about. There are no pathways out there where a person can say, I can show up at this X office in this Y city where I will be assessed and evaluated, and I will be given some, at least one page document to say, this is your current performance status, or these are the potential sport you can play. These are the sport for which you don't qualify. There is no mechanism like that in place. So the people you are seeing who are showing up by trial and error. These are people with disabilities who are self-inventing and what you call it as they're self-preparing themselves using information from the internet largely. There's a very small group of coaches scattered in different parts of the country who are the people who have the connection with the NSF. So that is the current reality. If you ask me what are the pathways, if a person with disability wants to do this, it is still a lost cause. It's a very hard battle. Unless you know somebody, you are still not able to show up at those state units or state games. You have to be a part of that network. That is why I say there is so much of scope for work in this area. For anybody working with women and promotion or development of women, there's huge scope to ask these questions and to develop those pathways, or to ask for the NSFs to develop those pathways. Despite having a female president for like 2+ years, there's nothing that is developed for Paralympics in India. In contrary to all the public claims that have been made, there is not a single structure in place. There is no promotion of women. There is promotion of women who are able to fill certain criteria for the organization to fulfill its requirements. Otherwise, it is not a democratic, it's not an equitable system. There is no pathways out there that people with disabilities can follow. So unless people are going and engaging in that, asking for their rights, engaging the courts and mandating for the guidelines to be provided. Say, example, in Samiha's case, the All India Sport Council of the Deaf had learned a very harsh lesson. The judgment was quite harsh, and they've been much more careful since then. For any events, there's more transparency. They put out written communications to the participants and the families. Earlier, everything was on WhatsApp. And if a parent cannot read and write, what is the problem? If they at least get a letter, they will take it to somebody in their village and they will get the postmaster or somebody to read the letter for them. So looking at it from a human rights angle, none of these federations have been working in an equitable manner, right? They're not democratic. They're very autocratic, very closed door. So the pathways are not there. So for the pathways to be happening, the disabled people's organizations have a huge potential to involve in this. So the DPOs at the state levels can actually begin to bring in people and say, if there are 10 or 15 people and with one DPO, the DPO can contact the NSF and say, hey, listen, we have 10 people. Can you come down and like run an evaluation and give our people? So the DPOs have I say, having studied, because my learning about India's disability rights movement is by reading of people like Professor Amita, Professor Ghai or Professor Danda's work, or Maya Kalyanpur. And I'm reading all those works, right? And Mr. J, Dr. Jain. And I'm reading all that and I'm saying, how did the NAB do it back in the day? How did the NPRD start and do something in Bengal? And reading that, I'm realizing is if the DPOs, the disabled people's organizations, are going to step up and start involving in sports. That's what I keep telling, that if the disabled people's organizations are going to start involving in sports, there is going to be a huge wave of improvement.
Okay,
that is my observation.
Thank you. I'll just leave now. I have to leave.
Yeah, sure. So does anyone else have questions, Bhaswati?
Yeah, any question? Yes, ma'am, please.
She's muted, I think.
Yeah, first I'd like to congratulate you on a very lucid and informative presentation. Of course, people like our colleague Renu, who's an expert in this field, and we have heard her. But this, to me at least, it was at one level one knows certain things, because you can just imagine, because you're trained in a certain way of thinking. So you know when all these people who get these medals and who reach the top, how difficult it must be. It's true, but you have delineated at so many levels the kind of obstacles that people face in their day-to-day lives, whether it is women or whether it is men. So that was very useful, and thanks for this really lucid presentation. And I think it opens our eyes to so many things. Of course, it's also true that in every field, any person with not just this kind of disability, but as you rightly pointed out, the intersectional dimensions, the multivalent dimensions of a problem like this has got so many levels that we need to address, and which we are, theoretically we are aware of it, but practically what it means for a young girl with this thing to be able to reach the long journey that has to be traveled both socially and physically and emotionally, and for a whole village or a whole family. I think it's something, and I think in every field we need to do this kind of thing to say how difficult it is, and therefore the need to be engaging at these multiple levels. So thank you for this. I mean, for me, it was a very informative, and I wish I could listen to more, because I can see that you have so much more to say.
Yeah, so I try to pack in a lot of information, and then in the past I have also been told that I speak quite fastly. I don't know, maybe it was my effort to I had a thick accent. In America, you're constantly, and something I want everybody to know here, right? Because this is a Center for Women Development Studies. I am literally the only Indian they have ever seen in this field. Can you believe it? In the entire global north, I'm literally the first PhD in the world in this discipline from India, right? So they have never interacted with an Indian. Their interaction with Indians is almost non-existent. So the 8 years of struggle I have experienced to survive, you know how the grind is, right? And so for me, it is very important to disseminate my learning into India, because there is this perception for Indian women in academia that we are facing these barriers, and we are not getting the exact podium onto which we can step. I did not even start off on a podium. No matter how grand this looks, I am down in the trenches. I am nowhere, and I'm fighting every day, right? So for me, it is very important to tell as much as I know. So, but again, like I said, a 1 hour does not do justice for what I studied across 8-9 years, right? So, but I really appreciate it that, in a center like this, wanting to know on topic like this may initiate so many thoughts, right, for so many academicians. So it really adds to my body of work I'm trying to build also. So I'm really thankful.
Thank you.
Bashudi, can I ask?
Yes.
I just want to, first of all, thank you for an interesting talk. I just want to, kind of extend the point that Renu was trying to make, that, how are we not looking at the family and the structures within the family? Because, of course, all other institutions and organizations, they all are problematic or they are not democratic. But what about family? The kind of reservation that any organization, institution may have in terms of escorting a disabled woman is also maybe be true with the families. So how are we not, how can we not look at family and only look at structures of institutions?
Yeah.
And I just a larger question that I want to ask. So how are we, kind of bringing family into this discourse or understanding of disabled women and sports?
Yeah, great question, ma'am. My thesis especially is based on the Bronfenbrenner's theory. That is something I use as a guidance everywhere. I didn't go deep into the theory here, but if you really look at the components of the theory, there are different systems: microsystems, meso, chronosystems. And when you talk of that, family is a very critical component in the microsystem. or the interaction of that family with the society and the attitudinal barriers. So if you study it from an academic context, yes, there is a need for us to conduct further research into studying just the family's interaction with the women with disabilities and the challenges or the supports. Say in my PhD research, what was identified, it is yet to get published, so you may have not come across it. But what I have identified in my, mine was a phenomenological study. And what we identified, one of the themes that came out of those interviews of asking people who had a physical disability from almost under 5 years of age or around 5 years, because they had to have a physical disability and navigate a schooling system. That was one of the requirement for inclusion. And you will be surprised. There was a good mix of families that said, you do whatever you want to do, but do it within the confines of that classroom or that class. If you're among your friends, if you're with everybody, do it. But the families did not have the bandwidth or the information or enable them further. That was one thing. In case of male participants, the female participants, it just got complicated for them to just get to the school, right? And when you talk further into asking what is the family context, who those family members are, what is the professional, because the entrepreneurs has a very detailed context setting for interview guides, right? And when you ask what is the profession of the parents, because there could be sport and participation, and you'll be baffled. Pre-puberty attitudes are different, because pre-puberty girl child is not a scare, at least within their context of who I have interviewed. Post-puberty, so much changes. The moment there is that first period happening, everything changes. The responsibility changes, the expenditure around the child changes. So technically, I was conducting a research study asking them about their sports and physical education, but really their grassroots realities are in such a way that for these children, these female children, to get to the school and get the education without being confined to the homes was an accomplishment. So yes, there is a critical need to conduct studies to see how the interaction of the families are with the women with disabilities. The women with disabilities I have engaged with, recruiting women with disabilities for the study was a challenge, no? Because families make a decision. Families will decide whether the women will participate, because these are women who are above 21 years of age. They're not underage children. And these were working women working in companies like Bank of America. And they would be like, Padmini, I will have to talk to ma'am, I have to talk to my mother, I have to get permission of my brother, because somehow that control is exercised. Like you said, there is a critical need to research in those areas and publish, because that is not being reported. Nobody is talking about those lived experiences of people, and nobody is reporting. There is no research out there that's talking about family. Yes, special education context, yes. Inclusive education, there has been some research out there, but within sports and restrictions or supports and barriers, no research has not been done so far. So that is also there. That it's an area that needs research. And to be honest, so far outside me, I have not seen many people who are writing about disability, sport, and other variables interactions. So I would love to see more research come out in these areas. It will enable a lot of work that the international community can also learn from.
Thank you.
Any other question? I think there is no question. So can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, my question is, okay, we understand that after a difficult situation, so many challenges, finally those are finally make it up to the podium. But there are cases like Duti Chand, the Duti Chand's case, and another case of Pinky Pramanik. Somehow it proves that they are not women and they cannot participate in that particular category. Yeah. But how do you define this? Because this is another case, like long back, if you trace the history of Olympic, the Russian women, they all actually men, according to amount of hormone present in their blood, and the question of the binaries that we have, these are men or women,
yes.
proper men in the field of sports. That how do you define this context?
Internationally, these topics are still very Eurocentric. The conversations, when we talk about, let's take a step back and look at it from a more bigger perspective. We are talking about bodies like the International Olympic Committee or international bodies. You should also look at when as researchers, if we want to go into asking these questions and exploring these conversations, we must consider what is the origin of these bodies that are regulating the sporting activities. They are mostly Eurocentric. They're definitely global north, the domination of the global north in regulating the sport. So it also becomes a very philosophical thing, is why is an individual competing in sport, right? So specific to gender and how the gender binary confinement is happening, or how the gender concepts are being interpreted, because it all again boils down to that physiological elements they are tracking, right? Those chemicals and those hormones, and that's the evaluation criteria. And within this is the lived experience of the gender. I could be looking like a female, but I could be a male, right? So these are concepts that are not being spoken about in India widely. So what is the responsibility we have as intersectional researchers is working in these spaces is, are we able to strike these conversations with the NSFs? When you talk about Dyuti Chand, as a person researching and studying sport governance, my mind is stopping at Athletic Federation of India. If Dyuti Chand faces an X scenario, or a Hima Das or somebody else faces some other case, once I'm crossing the border of this country and going out as a woman or a man or a transgendered athlete, my responsibility is with the Athletic Federation of India. So my reverse question back to you would be, is the Athletic Federation of India having experts or people who are able to engage in direct conversations on these matters? And here these organizations are being headed by the individuals who are saying, अरे ये सब छोड़ो ना, ये जो ठीक करेगा ये क्लियर है, इसको ये कर दो. By mistake, if this individual is somebody who's breaking this barriers and meeting the MQS or getting a medal somewhere, then the rhetoric changes, because again it's media dominated. So the need for research, what is the scope of research in this question you asked is, there is, if researchers can study on how gender is being situating it inside the Indian context. If more research can be studied how gender is getting situated in the Indian context, then we can talk about the gendering and the wrong gendering or right violations at the international level. Inside our country, we are still applying those Eurocentric concepts. Socio-culturally, we are not applying what is relevant to the Indian bodies. If I look like this, some Americans have a problem. They don't like to talk to me. And after I would talk, they would be like, oh, wow, you speak good English for an Indian. And I am like, so if imagine that is happening in academia, in sports, they are judging us by the Eurocentric standards. So there is a critical need for more research to come out in these areas for the Indian bodies. Then we will have the voice to amplify against this global domination and say, hey, listen, we are coming from this type of situation. This is the empirical data we have. These are the standards we are going to confine to. You can't hold us to Eurocentric standards. That is why we have more injury incidents in the Indian population. We are competing against Eurocentric standards. We are not competing for what is relevant to our bodies genetically or so. It's a larger debate, and yes, again, huge scope for research if explored.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah. Now you're right.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. It is really very interesting for me, and I think our center who are attending this lecture. It is a kind of a new ideas, especially we know the name. Like you said, we are aware of the name and those flying colors situation, but we don't know what is going on in the ground. Even as a woman who are participating in the sports, it's really challenging. We know it, it's true. And so it is a kind of dual problem being a disabled, being a woman, and it's a very difficult thing, and so many intersectionalities will come based on she's locating in a rural setup or urban setup, or maybe their parents are one of, maybe they are interested in sports or not, so many things. And I think disabled women, I don't know whether they are so much in I mean inside home, or the chess or other thing which are very disable friendly. What do you say? I mean, those
That's what
sports.
is pushed. The moment a person is blind, they want to say play chess. And
chess, yeah.
even play board games. That is one of the findings in my research.
Yes, board games are
PhD
much.
research also, 90% of the women participants said we only did board games. Sit and play. Whatever you play, you sit and play. Don't go and get more physical injuries, then become more big problem for us. If you want to go to school, don't get injury. That is the children are told across both the genders. For women, as soon as the puberty thing crosses, it's a different hell for them because of the menstruation and all the associated issues. It's that basic.
But still there is no encouragement from the family level. So there is, I don't know any grandmaster women who are disabled till date. No. So we can understand even they are not encouraged even sitting at home and play on board games. So thank you so much for your presentation. And it's a great I mean, it's for me, it's a very interesting presentation. I know so many things, and thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everybody.